So welcome, our remarkable colleague, Hilary. We so appreciate your consistent leadership and solidarity. And as always at Setsi, we begin all things by giving thanks to the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Hilary, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I think in many ways, our paths have crossed in many respects. And so I'll share a little bit. But first and foremost, I'll share that as one of the founding partners at Audaxa Ventures, we focus on investing in the most promising solutions at the intersection of climate and health. And we invest in those led by diverse women and non-binary founders. So that's very much the hat that I wear every day. And yet what I find in that work is that I bring so much of my decade plus, more than a decade of experience of working both in the social innovation space as well as a head of sustainability for a number of well-known Canadian brands, and really working in the space to advance innovation, sustainability, and a big significant part of my work has been ensuring that the diversity of our communities is reflected in the diversity of the leadership of the organizations that we work in. And it's something that I feel very passionate about. And it's also something that I've devoted a lot of my career to and continue to, both in my formal day job and all the others. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Incredible. Thank you so much. Yeah, our paths have crossed so many times in various ecosystems, and it's always been a pleasure connecting. So my next question, what's inspiring you right now? What has you curious, or what's keeping you up at nights?
I think more and more what inspires me is the number of leaders who are stepping up to build businesses. And I think for a very long time, we have seen that there is an opportunity, and we've also seen I think the data shows that we've got a 23% increase of women pursuing entrepreneurship. I think the rates are relatively steady across the board. But I think what gives me hope and what gives me inspiration, I will say, is the number of women that I meet with on a regular basis, and not just women, I will say diverse teams that I meet with on a regular basis who are really tackling very big challenges with innovative solutions. And I think that's what gives me hope. I think one of the latest stats, because I always think that numbers are a really interesting way of looking at it, is that we are not only seeing an increase of representation, but we're seeing an increase of representation of diverse founders who are getting into it. I think that's the part that gets me really excited. And I think back to when I was working with the Gates Foundation almost a decade ago. And one of the stats that we would look at was that women would often wait, 5, 6, 7 years. And often it was later in life that women would pursue entrepreneurship because they saw that no one was solving the challenges that they could see very clearly. I think what we're seeing is that in some respects, the last few years and the challenges of the last few years, we're seeing people have stepped up and taken the courage to tackle some of these really complex challenges. And I think that's something that gives me a lot of hope. On the other side, I think we are continuing to see that the representation of those that get funding is still way too low. And I think we sit with that number of 2%. It went down to less than 2% of companies getting funded. And that's all women. We know that that's disproportionately not women of color. And I think that's something that we really want to be able to shift, is not only getting all founders access to capital, but also making sure that the diversity of our communities is reflected in those who are getting funded. That's what gives me hope, but also gives me, keeps me up at night and keeps me motivated to try and shift that.
That's incredible and daunting work. So once again, I applaud your leadership, your tenacity, and all that you're doing for so many. And it's a perfect segue to my next question. What challenges and barriers do you face in your work? And what are some of the approaches you and your colleagues are taking to overcome some of these challenges and barriers?
Yeah, I'll start with the challenge that we see is that the number of women reaching the later stages of business development. So yes, we're seeing this great increase, but the amount of leaders reaching that later stage is still disproportionately, a group of individuals who have been longtime leaders, and it's not shifting as much as we would like to see. And so one of the challenges is when we look at those companies that are being successful in Canada, in North America, and even globally, how do we get companies, particularly those led by diverse leaders, to the later stages of building businesses? And I heard a founder say this yesterday, and I think it's very true, is the skill sets that get you to be successful in the early stage as a startup. And, in many ways, we're a startup too. We're founders and we navigate this space as well. Are not the skills that get you to the next stage and to the next stage. And so I think the piece that really is a challenge is how do we continue to support founders, not only in those early stages of getting started, but we adapt and we support them at the next stage and we support them at the next stage. And so as we've been really thinking about how to structure our fund in a way that really supports founders, for us, a key part of that has been ensuring that we don't just have the ability to do an initial check, but we have the ability to do a follow-on check and a second follow-on check, because we recognize that the pathway to building successful businesses doesn't just happen overnight, and it certainly doesn't just happen in one iteration. And the skill sets that we need, or that founders need, as a founder myself, they adapt over time. And so how do we make sure that we're adapting to support the founders through that process? And I will say the other piece that really is a challenge is, we have made this choice to invest in founders who are working in climate and health, which means we are not just working on the gender-based or the social equity-based investing. We are also working in this space where we have to be able to work with founders to prove not only return on investment, but return on impact. And that's daunting. And, it's something that we've spent a lot of time building a model that respects the many needs of a founder, but also the needs of an investor. And so it's a challenge, right? How do we make sure that we know what's happening, but how do we make sure that we're demonstrating that in a way that's compelling so that we can invest in more?
Sure. That is daunting work. So the traditional ROI model now has created a dynamic where not only is it just return on investment, but it's return on impact. You're looking at disclosures. There's just so much burden of proof. But I think, once again, it's important to find ways and means to advance this work. And yeah, so I couldn't agree more. It's daunting, but you're up for it and you're doing remarkable work. So I couldn't applaud your leadership more. And as you know, I know your GP and your colleagues. So I'm a huge fan of the frameworks and models that you're building and the founders and investors that you're engaging that are trying to transform the way capital flows within various ecosystems. So my next question is, do you have a set of key priorities in your work right now?
Yeah, great question. I think the first and foremost is engaging with aligned partners. So for us, it's, this is it at the end of the day, it's about relationships. And so for us, it's about identifying and working with aligned partners, whether those are ecosystem partners or investing partners. That's a really key part that we look to. And that example that I shared earlier about building a framework around investment and impact is really important, because as we go into those partnerships, being able to have a clear way of articulating, this is how we're looking at impact, this is how we're looking at representation. So that's really first and foremost a key part. The second part is founders. So we work between our team, we work with hundreds of founders and having hundreds of conversations with founders to support them, because I think one of the things that is not often known about early stage investors, especially for us, we're at the seed stage, is that it takes a few years to get to this point. And we often work with those founders for the years leading up to an investment, but we also work with them in the years after those investments. And so we work with founders almost every single day. And one of the key points for us is making sure that they have what they need to be successful. And that's different for every founder. And then I think the third one is really being able to move the dial and demonstrate. And this is something that I speak with my peers about. And, I'm very, very active in working with my peers who are also potential co-investors or who are moving the dial themselves. because this is not work that is done alone. This is, we have a great team and a growing team, which is fantastic. But we also know that, it's really important to work with your peers to advance this work. And so we're very active in that. We are often sharing opportunities. We're often sharing, events and all of those pieces, because if we are really going to move the dial, and many of us have devoted a lot of time and energy around how do we advance the diversity of those who are getting invested, it takes a team approach, and not just a single team approach. It takes a many team approach. And so that's something that we're really focused on.
Yeah, it is a collective impact approach. Justice, access, inclusion, diversity, decolonization, equity. These are generational movements and generational struggles. So it requires intergenerational collaboration. It requires peer-driven frameworks of learnings and sharing. It requires a community of practice. So once again, I applaud your leadership, your visionary leadership, and your consistency in terms of this ecosystem, and really trying to your best to ensure that we advance these movements that are essential to the impact that we all want to see. So it's a perfect segue to my second last question. What is your ultimate goal, and what does success look like and feel like to you and your colleagues?
Oh, yeah, that is a great question. I think at the end of the day, what we're excited to be a part of is a shift, and a shift where, I sit in a lot of boardrooms with peers who don't look like me, particularly men in the investor space, where often I'm the only one at the table, or I'm one of two. I also sit at board tables where I'm one or one of two. And I think what we're really seeing is that success looks like diversity at the table, both at the investor table, at the founder table, and at the board table. And so as we really look at things, I always start by saying, our cap tables for our founders should be diverse, because that actually sets them up for the value add that we talk about in terms of diverse teams. Our founding teams should be diverse because they reflect the diversity of what we need for founders to be and teams to be successful. But I also think the piece that sometimes gets missed is that our leadership in our country and the leadership of our boards needs to reflect that same diversity, because that's when we start to make different decisions. That's when we start to make decisions that reflect not only those who've traditionally had power, but those who have the lived experience that is so critical to building the future that we are all here to build. And maybe then I'll start by saying, or I'll finish by saying, we don't underestimate the urgency of the climate and health challenges that we are facing. I think the last few years, if there are any indication, is that it is often women who are on the front lines of both the health crisis as well as the climate crisis. And it's disproportionately women of color who are taking on not only the labor, but the toll of our climate and health crisis. And so we understand that it's not just about supporting women to be founders and to be successful, but it's about ensuring that those who are disproportionately affected by the climate and health crisis that we are facing are a part of the solution. And I think that's, for us, what success looks like. That's, for me, what success looks like is, being able to pave a path, but ultimately get out of the way so that the people who are the most affected are building the solutions to solve some of our most pressing challenges.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. That's incredible. So my last question, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and our viewers?
I think one of the questions that I always I ask myself, but I also ask those around me is, where are you uniquely positioned to lead? And I think we are surrounded by a lot of ideals of what success looks like. And I think one of the things that, for me in my journey, there's been a lot of learning around not taking someone else's path, but really figuring out, like, where am I uniquely positioned to lead? And at the end of the day, when founders come to us, or even investors come to us, that is really the most important question that we ask is, is this leader, is this team uniquely positioned to lead in this area? And that takes a lot of reflection, but it also takes a lot of honesty and being able to ask your friends and your community, where am I uniquely positioned to lead? And how do I make sure that I have a voice in this space? And so that would be my challenge to your viewers is, there are so many incredible humans out there who have so much experience and so much to offer. How do we support our peers, our friends in finding the place where they are uniquely positioned to lead? And how do we support them in being successful in that path?
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Thank you so much, Hilary. I so appreciate your candor, your transparency, your authenticity, and your consistent visionary leadership. And as always at Setsi, we close these conversations the way we began, by giving thanks to the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, Hilary. I so appreciate you.
Thank you, Victor. Pleasure.